My wife suggested a couple swap with her best friend and her husband. I thought I was getting a good deal and agreed. That was my biggest mistake. Before continuing the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories, and leave your like on the video. My name is Derek, and I'm about to tell you the story of how one dinner conversation destroyed my marriage and nearly destroyed me. But it also taught me who I really was underneath years of manipulation. It was a Thursday evening in October. Nothing special about it. My wife Sarah and I were having dinner at our best friend's house, something we did monthly. The dining room was warm, filled with the smell of roast chicken and the sound of comfortable conversation between people who'd known each other for years. Sarah sat across from me, picking at her salad while Mark talked about his promotion at work. His wife Lisa was refilling wine glasses when Sarah suddenly put down her fork and cleared her throat. "I have an idea," she announced, her voice carrying that tone she used when she'd already made up her mind about something. "What if we tried something different, like a couple swap on Thursday nights?" The words hung in the air like smoke. I thought she was joking, maybe the wine talking, until I saw her reach across the table and place her hand on Mark's arm. Not a casual touch, but something deliberate, intimate. "I'm serious," she continued, her fingers still resting on his forearm. "We're all adults. We trust each other. It could be fun." Lisa dropped her wine glass. It didn't shatter, just rolled across the hardwood floor, leaving a trail of red wine like blood. She started crying immediately, but then something strange happened. She stopped, just like that. Mid-sob, she wiped her eyes and looked at Sarah with an expression I couldn't quite read. I sat there feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. This was my wife of 6 years, the woman who complained when I left dishes in the sink, casually suggesting we swap spouses like we were trading baseball cards. "Derek?" Sarah's voice snapped me back to reality. "What do you think?" I looked around the table. Mark was staring at his plate, his face flushed. Lisa had composed herself completely, which seemed almost more unsettling than her initial tears. I started, then stopped. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. "Are you serious right now?" Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper only I could hear. "You've been so distant lately. I thought this might help bring some excitement back." The way she said it made me feel guilty, like our marriage problems were somehow my fault, like I wasn't doing enough to keep her interested. "So we're doing this?" I heard myself ask, though it felt like someone else was speaking. "Unless you have a problem with it," she replied, her tone carrying a subtle challenge. I looked at our friends again. Lisa nodded slowly, like she was agreeing to something she'd rather avoid, but felt she had no choice about. Mark finally looked up from his plate and shrugged. "Sure," he said. "Why not?" The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and clinking silverware. We made arrangements. Our first swap would be next Thursday. I would take Lisa to dinner and Sarah would go out with Mark. When we left their house, Sarah was practically glowing. She hummed in the car, something she only did when she was particularly pleased with herself. "That went well," she said as we pulled into our driveway. I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness, trying to process what had just happened. Did it? Of course it did. You saw how they reacted. They're excited about it too. I wanted to point out that Lisa had seemed more resigned than excited, and Mark had looked uncomfortable throughout the entire conversation. But something in Sarah's satisfied smile told me she wouldn't want to hear my concerns. Instead, I followed her into our house, where she immediately went to take a shower, still humming that same tune. The week that followed felt like living with a stranger wearing my wife's face. It started with small things. On Friday morning, I found shopping bags in her car, new clothes from expensive stores that she'd never shopped at before. When I asked about them, she just shrugged and said she felt like treating herself. "For the swap?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Maybe," she replied, not looking up from her coffee. "I want to look nice." She spent more time on her phone than usual, always angling the screen away from me. The device seemed permanently attached to her hand, buzzing with notifications that made her smile in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. Tuesday evening, I tried to bring up what had happened at dinner. We were watching television, some crime drama she usually criticized, but she was absorbed in it like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. "About Thursday," I started. "What about it?" she asked, still not looking away from the screen. "Are we really doing this? Because if you're having second thoughts..." "I'm not." Her response was immediate. Final. "Are you?" The way she asked it felt like a test, like there was only one acceptable answer. I thought about how she'd been pulling away from me over the past few months, how our conversations had become superficial, how she'd been working late more often. No, I lied. Just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. She finally looked at me then, and for just a moment, I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like pity. Good, she said. I think this will be exactly what we need. Wednesday brought more strangeness. Mark called while we were having breakfast. Sarah answered on the second ring, something she never did with calls during our morning routine. Hi, she said, her voice dropping to that soft, intimate tone she used to use with me during our first year of marriage. She walked into the kitchen while talking, and I could hear her voice but not the words. The conversation lasted 10 minutes. When she came back, her cheeks were flushed. Just confirming tomorrow, she said, sitting back down at the table. What did you two talk about for 10 minutes? Details. Where we're going, what time, that sort of thing. But something in her expression told me it was more than that. There was an excitement there, an anticipation that made my stomach turn. That evening, Lisa called our landline. Sarah was in the shower, so I answered. Oh, hi, Derek, she said, her voice sounding strained. I was calling to confirm tomorrow night. Right. The swap. The word still felt foreign in my mouth. Yes, that. There was a long pause. Look, I wanted to ask, are you sure about this? I mean, really sure? Her question caught me off guard. Are you having second thoughts? No, it's not that. It's just... Another pause. Longer this time. This feels bigger than just dinner, you know? Like once we cross this line, things won't be the same. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, I said, though I wasn't convinced. She was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Maybe you're right. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. The call ended, leaving me holding the phone and wondering what she'd really wanted to say. Sarah emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping wet. Who was that? She asked. Lisa. Confirming tomorrow. Something flickered across her face. Annoyance. Maybe, or concern. What did she say exactly? Just confirming the time. She seemed nervous. Sarah nodded, but I could see her processing this information. She went to bed early that night, claiming she was tired, but I could hear her whispering into her phone until well after midnight. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how my marriage had become something I no longer recognized, and why I felt like I was walking into a trap of my own making. Thursday arrived like a storm cloud I'd been watching approach all week. Sarah spent 2 hours getting ready, which was unusual. She typically needed 20 minutes for her daily routine, but that evening she treated it like preparation for a red carpet event. When she finally emerged from our bedroom, I barely recognized her. The dress was black, form-fitting, with a neckline that would have made me jealous if another man saw her wearing it, which I realized with a sick feeling was exactly the point. New dress? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I've had it for a while, she said, adjusting her earrings in the hallway mirror. I'd never seen those earrings either, but I didn't push it. Her makeup was different too, more dramatic, like she was trying to become someone else entirely. The transformation was so complete that when she kissed my cheek goodbye, even her perfume smelled unfamiliar. Have fun, she said, her eyes bright with anticipation that felt wrong somehow. I stopped at a flower shop on the way to pick up Lisa. It seemed like the right thing to do, even though nothing about this situation felt right. I chose a simple bouquet of sunflowers, cheerful, non-romantic, safe. When she answered the door, she looked surprised to see the flowers, then touched in a way that made me wonder when someone had last brought her flowers. You didn't have to do this, she said, but she was smiling for the first time since that dinner conversation. My mother raised me to never show up empty-handed, I replied. She was dressed nicely but conservatively, a navy blue dress that looked like something she'd wear to work, not a date. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back in the same style she'd worn for years. She looked like herself, which made me realize how much Sarah had not. We went to an Italian restaurant downtown, nothing fancy, just a place with good food and quiet booths. She ordered wine immediately, a full glass, which she finished before our appetizers arrived. Sorry, she said, noticing my expression. I'm more nervous than I thought I'd be. We don't have to do this, you know? We could just have dinner as friends and call it a night. She looked at me with something like gratitude, then ordered another glass of wine. As the evening progressed, she became more talkative, but her conversation kept circling back to Mark. He's been different lately, she said, twirling pasta around her fork. More, I don't know, secretive. He used to tell me everything about his day, but now he comes home and goes straight to his office. Different how. Working late more often. And he's been going to the gym. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. He hasn't been to a gym in 10 years, and suddenly he's there 3 times a week. Maybe he's just trying to get in shape? Maybe. She finished her second glass of wine. But when I asked if I could join him, he said it was his me time. Never used to need me time before. The conversation felt loaded, like she was trying to tell me something without actually saying it. When I tried to probe deeper, she'd change the subject or order another drink. Your wife, she said suddenly, looking up from her third glass. Has she been acting different too? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? This whole idea came out of nowhere, didn't it? The swapping thing. Had you two ever talked about anything like that before? I thought about it. No, never. She said she wanted to bring some excitement back to our marriage. And you believed that? Why wouldn't I? Lisa looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding whether to say something important. Derek, can I ask you something? When was the last time Sarah seemed genuinely excited to spend time with just you? The question hit me harder than I expected. I tried to think of recent examples, a romantic dinner, a weekend trip, even just a movie night where she seemed present and engaged, but I couldn't come up with anything recent. We've been married 6 years. The honeymoon phase doesn't last forever. No, but affection should. Respect should. Basic interest in your partner's life should. By the time we left the restaurant, she was unsteady on her feet. I helped her to my car, and she leaned against me longer than necessary. Thank you, she said as I drove her home. For dinner, for the flowers, for just being decent about all this. What do you mean? Nothing. Forget I said anything. When we reached her house, she hesitated with her hand on the door handle. Derek, be careful, okay? I can't explain why, but just be careful. Before I could ask what she meant, she got out of the car and hurried to her front door. I drove home slowly, dreading what I might find there. Sarah was already back, sitting on our couch in a silk robe I'd never seen before. Her hair was mussed, her lipstick gone. She looked like someone who'd had a very good evening. How was your date? She asked, but her tone suggested she didn't really care about my answer. Fine. Yours? Wonderful. She moved closer to me on the couch, her eyes bright with an energy that made me uncomfortable. Tell me everything. What did you two talk about? Did she mention Mark? Did she seem to be enjoying herself? The questions came rapidly, like she was conducting an interview disguised as curiosity. When I gave vague answers, she pressed for details. What restaurant, what we ate, how many drinks Lisa had, whether she seemed nervous. She was asking about you too, I said, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. Oh? What kind of questions? About whether you'd been acting differently lately. About whether we'd ever discussed this kind of thing before. Something flickered across Sarah's face. Annoyance, maybe concern. And what did you tell her? The truth, that this was your idea and came out of nowhere. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this. What else did she say about Mark? That he's been working late more. Going to the gym. Being secretive. Secretive how? The intensity of her interest was strange. Why would she care so much about Mark's behavior unless... Sarah, can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you been thinking about this arrangement? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. What do you mean? Ideas like this don't just pop into someone's head during dinner. Had you been considering it for a while? Does it matter? We're doing it now. It matters to me. She studied my face for a moment, like she was trying to decide how much truth I could handle. A few weeks, she said finally. Mark and I were talking about how routine our marriages had become, and the idea just sort of evolved. You and Mark were talking about our marriages? Not in a bad way. Just, you know how couples sometimes discuss their relationships with friends. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right. When had she and Mark started having private conversations about our marriages, and why was this the first I was hearing about it? That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when my wife had started keeping secrets from me. The second Thursday arrived with a sense of inevitability that made my skin crawl. Sarah's preparation routine was even more elaborate this time. She'd bought new lingerie. I found the receipt on her dresser, not hidden like she usually hid expensive purchases. The total was more than we typically spent on groceries in a month. When I picked up Lisa for our second date, she looked worse than before. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook when she lit her cigarette in my car. Since when do you smoke? I asked. Since last week, she replied, taking a long drag. Stress, I guess. We went to the same restaurant, but she was different this time. Jumpier, more agitated. She ordered wine before we even sat down and finished the first glass before our server had taken our food order. I need to tell you something, she said suddenly, her words slightly slurred. About last Thursday. What about it? She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Mark came home that night and was different. Angry, almost. He kept asking what you and I had talked about like he was worried I'd said something wrong. Wrong about what? That's what I asked him. And he said... She paused to drain her wine glass. He said I shouldn't be asking you questions about Sarah, that it wasn't my business, but you were just making conversation. That's what I told him. But Derek, the way he said it was like he was warning me about something. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and her face went pale. Who is it? I asked. Sarah, she whispered, showing me the screen. The message was simple. Hope you're having fun tonight. But something about that message made Lisa completely shut down. She grabbed her phone, deleted the message, and stuffed the device back in her purse like it had burned her. Lisa, what's wrong? Nothing. Everything's fine. She waved to get the server's attention. Can I get another glass of wine? Actually, make it a double. The rest of dinner was painful. She drank steadily, answered my questions with one-word responses, and kept checking her phone every few minutes. When she excused herself to use the bathroom, she was gone for 15 minutes. When she returned, her eyes were red-rimmed, but she insisted she was fine. Allergies, she said, though it was November and nothing was blooming. The drive to her house was silent except for the sound of her breathing, which seemed too fast and too shallow. When I pulled into her driveway, she didn't immediately get out. Instead, she sat with her hand on the door handle, staring at her house like it was a prison. Are you okay? I asked. She turned to look at me, and for a moment, I thought she was going to cry. Her mouth opened like she wanted to say something important, something that might explain everything that had been happening. Derek, she started, then stopped. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you woke up one day and everything familiar had changed, but you can't figure out when it happened? Every day lately. I used to know who my husband was. We used to tell each other everything. Now I feel like I'm sharing my house with a stranger. When did that start? A few months ago. Maybe longer? It's hard to pinpoint exactly because it happened so gradually. She finally looked at me directly. But I think Sarah and Mark have been talking more than we realized. What do you mean? I think they've been planning this longer than either of us knows. And I don't think it's really about spicing up our marriages. Before I could ask what she meant, she got out of the car. Thank you for dinner, she said through the open window. And Derek? Maybe we should both start paying closer attention to things. I waited until she was inside before driving home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been trying to warn me about something. Sarah was waiting for me when I got home, practically vibrating with excitement. She was wearing that same silk robe, but tonight she looked different, predatory almost. How was it? She asked before I'd even closed the front door. Fine. Just fine? What did you talk about? Did she seem upset about something? Did she mention anything about Mark? The questions came faster this time, more specific, like she was fishing for particular information. She mentioned that he was angry after last Thursday, wanted to know what we'd talked about. Sarah's expression shifted slightly. Angry about what? About her asking me questions about you, apparently. What kind of questions? The same kind you're asking me right now. For a moment, Sarah looked annoyed, like I'd said something wrong. Then her smile returned, but it seemed forced. I'm just curious about how everyone's adjusting to this new arrangement, she said. It's important that we're all comfortable. Are you comfortable with it? Of course. Why wouldn't I be? I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of checking up on each other going on. Like we're all gathering intelligence instead of just having dinner. Sarah's laugh sounded hollow. You're overthinking things, Derek. Sometimes people are just curious. But as she pressed for more details about my evening, watching my face carefully with each question, I realized that Lisa might be right. This felt less like curiosity and more like surveillance, and I was starting to wonder what my wife was really looking for. The dinner with Sarah's parents was her idea, sprung on me Friday morning like an ambush. My parents want to see us this weekend, she announced over coffee. I told them we'd come for dinner Sunday. Since when do your parents want impromptu family dinners? Since they haven't seen us in a month, she replied. But something in her tone felt rehearsed. Her parents lived in a modest ranch house in the suburbs, the same house where she'd grown up. Her mother met us at the door with her usual warm smile, but it faltered slightly when she hugged her daughter. "You smell different," her mother said, pulling back to study her daughter's face. "New perfume?" Sarah's cheeks flushed. "Same as always, Mom." "No, it's definitely different." Her mother's nose wrinkled slightly. "Heavier, more expensive." I watched this exchange with growing unease. Her mother was right. It was a different scent, something that definitely wasn't the light floral perfume Sarah had worn for years. Dinner started normally enough. Her father asked about work, her mother fussed over the roast beef, and Sarah made small talk about the weather. But I could see her fidgeting, like she was building up to something. It came during dessert. "We have something to tell you," Sarah announced, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. Her parents looked at us expectantly, probably hoping for news about grandchildren. "Derek and I have decided to explore our relationship in new ways. We're doing couple swaps with our friends." The silence that followed was deafening. Her father's fork clattered against his plate. Her mother's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, comprehension, and finally, horror. "Couple swaps?" her mother repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's perfectly normal," Sarah continued, her tone defensive but determined. "Lots of modern couples do it. It keeps relationships fresh, prevents boredom. We're adults who trust each other." "Are you insane?" her father exploded, his face turning red. "You're married. Marriage means commitment, fidelity." "Marriage means different things to different people," Sarah interrupted. "This is a mutual decision Derek and I made together." I opened my mouth to speak, but Sarah shot me a look that could have frozen fire. Her mother was staring at me now, her eyes filled with disappointment. "Derek, surely you can't think this is a good idea." I started, but Sarah jumped in before I could finish. "He's completely supportive, we both are. This is about trust and communication. This is about destroying your marriage," her mother said sharply. "Just like your sister." The mention of her sister made Sarah stiffen. Her sister had gotten divorced 3 years earlier after what the family diplomatically called experimenting with different lifestyles. "This is nothing like what happened with Amy," Sarah snapped. "Isn't it?" her father asked. "She started with exploring new experiences too, said her husband was boring, that she needed excitement. Where did that lead?" "To her being happier," Sarah shot back, though we all knew Amy had struggled significantly since the divorce. "To her being alone and in therapy," her mother corrected. "And now you want to follow the same path?" The argument escalated from there. Her parents questioned our judgment, our marriage, and our moral compass. Sarah defended our decision with increasing desperation, throwing around terms like modern relationship dynamics and evolved thinking. Through it all, I sat silent, watching my wife transform into someone I barely recognized, someone willing to destroy relationships with her own parents, to defend something that felt fundamentally wrong. The evening ended with her mother in tears, and her father refusing to shake my hand goodbye. "I raised you better than this," her mother said at the door. "Both of you!" The drive home was tense and silent until we were halfway there. "I can't believe you just sat there," Sarah finally exploded. "They attacked our decision, attacked us, and you said nothing. What was I supposed to say? You were supposed to defend us, defend our marriage. Instead, you sat there like a lump while they made us sound like perverts. Maybe because I'm not sure I disagree with them." She turned to stare at me, her eyes blazing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe your parents have a point. Maybe this whole thing is a mistake." "It's too late for second thoughts." "Derek?" "Why? We can stop anytime we want." "No, we can't." Her voice was cold, final. "Not without consequences." That word, consequences, hung in the air between us like a threat. "What kind of consequences?" "Nothing. I just meant people would talk. Mark and Lisa would be hurt. It would be awkward." But the way she'd said it suggested something more serious than social awkwardness. When we got home, she went straight to the bedroom and slammed the door. I could hear her on the phone again, her voice low and urgent. Whatever conversation she was having, it went on for over an hour. The next few days passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Sarah and I barely spoke except when necessary. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone, disappearing for errands that took hours and returning with no bags or explanations. Wednesday evening, I decided to call Lisa. I told myself it was just to check on her, but I realized I was hoping she might help me make sense of what was happening. "Can we meet?" I asked when she answered. I need to talk to someone who understands what this feels like. I can't, she whispered. Mark's been different since Sunday. More controlling. He checks my phone now, asks where I've been. Checks your phone? Says he's just curious about who I'm talking to. But Derek, I think something's wrong. Really wrong. What do you mean? I found some things. Credit card statements, receipts. Mark's been lying about where he goes during the day. What kind of lies? He says he's at work, but there are charges from restaurants and hotels during his work hours. And they're not business meetings. I called his office and they said he'd taken personal time on those days. My stomach dropped. How long has this been going on? Months? Maybe longer? I'm scared to dig too deep because if he finds out I've been investigating, has he hurt you? There was a long pause. Not physically, but he's been saying things, making threats about what would happen if I embarrassed him. He knows things about my family, my job, things he could use against me. Lisa, maybe we should meet somewhere public. You shouldn't have to handle this alone. I can't. He's tracking my location through my phone. He knows everywhere I go. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a door slamming in the background. He's home, she whispered. I have to go. The line went dead, leaving me holding the phone and feeling helpless. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to Sarah's breathing, wondering how many lies she'd told me, how long this had been planned, and what those consequences she'd mentioned really meant. Around 2 a.m., I got up and went to her purse. I told myself I was just looking for her phone charger, but I was really hoping to find some clue about what was happening. Instead, I found something worse. Tucked into a side pocket was a folded piece of paper. It was a printout of an email exchange between Sarah and someone identified only as M, presumably Mark. The first email was dated 3 weeks before our dinner at their house. Everything is in place. Derek suspects nothing. Lisa is getting more difficult to control, but we can handle her. The response? Good. Stick to the timeline we discussed. Phase 1 is almost complete. Phase 1. Timeline. This wasn't spontaneous. It was a plan. I photographed the emails with my phone and put the paper back exactly where I'd found it. The next morning, Sarah was unusually cheerful, humming in the kitchen while making coffee. When I told her I had to work late that evening, she seemed pleased rather than disappointed. That's fine, she said. I'll find something to do. I called in sick to work instead and spent the day parked across from Mark's office building. At 11 a.m. he left and drove to an upscale hotel downtown. Sarah's car was already in the parking lot. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. I followed them inside and watched from the lobby as they took an elevator to the 5th floor. They were comfortable together, familiar, like they'd done this many times before. That evening, when Sarah came home with shopping bags and claimed she'd spent the day at the mall, I said nothing. But I knew now that everything she'd told me for months had been lies. The third Thursday was 2 days away, and I realized I needed to warn Lisa about what I'd discovered. But more than that, I needed to figure out what phase 2 of their plan involved. Because whatever they were planning, I was certain it was going to be much worse than simple adultery. As I watched my wife prepare for another evening with her lover, I realized that the woman I'd married had either been an elaborate fiction from the beginning, or she'd been replaced by someone I didn't recognize at all. Either way, I was living with a stranger who saw me as an obstacle to be removed rather than a husband to be loved, and I was finally ready to stop being a victim. I spent Thursday morning preparing for what I suspected would be our final swap. Armed with new knowledge about Sarah and Mark's deception, I decided to be completely honest with Lisa about what I'd discovered. I picked her up at the usual time, but instead of going to a restaurant, I drove to a quiet parking lot overlooking the lake. We need to talk, I said, turning off the engine. She looked panicked. Derek, if Mark finds out we're not at dinner, he's not going to find out because he's busy with my wife. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken of the email exchange. Lisa, they've been planning this for months. She read the messages, her face growing pale. Phase 1? Timeline? This sounds like a business plan. That's because I think it is. They're not just having an affair, they're manipulating us towards some specific goal. What goal? I don't know yet. But I have some ideas. I told her about following them to the hotel, about the lies and the gradual isolation I'd been experiencing. What I can't figure out is why they need us to participate. Why not just get divorced and be together? Lisa was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the water. Then she pulled out her phone. There's something I haven't told you, she said, about Mark's behavior lately. She scrolled through her text messages and showed me several from Mark over the past few weeks. They were subtle but controlling, asking where she was, who she was with, reminding her about money they owed, mentioning her job security. "He's been making me feel unstable," she said. "Like I'm lucky to have him, like I couldn't make it on my own. And he's been documenting everything." "What do you mean?" "Pictures of the house when it's messy, recordings of arguments where I sound hysterical, screenshots of my spending. He says it's just for his own records, but Derek, I think he's building a case." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. A divorce case. They're gathering evidence to make us look like the bad spouses. But we haven't done anything wrong. Haven't we? We've been going on dates with other people. We have photos together, dinner receipts, probably hours of conversation that could be taken out of context. Lisa's eyes widened with understanding. The swap wasn't about spicing up our marriages. It was about creating evidence that we're cheaters too. Exactly. Now when they file for divorce, they can claim we were both unfaithful. They look like the victims who tried to save their marriages through counseling and open communication, while we look like the cheaters who took advantage of their generosity. But the whole thing was their idea. Who's going to believe that? Especially if they've been documenting our enthusiasm for the arrangement. I thought about Sarah's questions after each dinner, her insistence on details. They've probably been recording our conversations about it, making it sound like we pushed for this. Lisa put her head in her hands. "I feel so stupid. I knew something was wrong, but I kept telling myself I was being paranoid." "You weren't paranoid. You were being systematically manipulated by someone you trusted." We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching boats move across the lake. Finally, Lisa spoke. "What do we do now? We gather evidence of our own, and we need to be smart about it." Over the next hour, we made a plan. Lisa would start documenting Mark's real schedule, his lies about where he'd been. I would look for more evidence of Sarah's affair and try to find proof of their longer timeline. "We need to be careful," I warned her. "If they realize we know, I understand, but Derek, I can't keep living like this. Feeling crazy, questioning everything, walking on eggshells in my own house. Neither can I." When I dropped her off at home, she squeezed my hand. "Thank you for telling me the truth. For the first time in months, I don't feel like I'm losing my mind." I drove home to find Sarah in the kitchen, her hair slightly mussed, her makeup gone. She was cooking dinner with unusual enthusiasm. "How was your evening?" she asked without turning around. "Fine. Yours?" "Oh, I just stayed home." "Oh, I just stayed." "Watched some movies? Did some cleaning?" She glanced at me over her shoulder. Lisa seemed quiet tonight. "Everything okay?" The casual lie, delivered while cooking my dinner, was almost impressive in its audacity. "She's been stressed about work," I said. Well, hopefully these dinners are helping her relax." As I watched my wife, who had spent the evening in a hotel room with another man, express fake concern about my emotional well-being, I realized how completely she'd been playing me. But now the game had changed. Over the next week, Lisa and I worked together like private investigators. We met briefly each day during lunch breaks, sharing what we'd discovered. Her findings were damning. Mark had been lying about his schedule for months, not weeks. Credit card statements showed a pattern of hotel visits and expensive dinners during times when he claimed to be at work or the gym. My discoveries were equally revealing. I found more printed emails in Sarah's purse, these ones discussing timeline acceleration and asset protection. There were references to lawyers, to financial planning, to something called exit strategy. "They're not just planning divorces," I told Lisa during one of our meetings. "They're planning to take us for everything we're worth." "How?" "Think about it. Mark knows all your financial information, your spending habits, your emotional triggers. Sarah knows mine. They've been studying us, documenting our weaknesses, setting us up to look like unstable, unfaithful spouses, while positioning themselves as the long-suffering partners who tried everything to save their marriages." "Exactly. And with the evidence they've gathered during these swaps, they can claim we were the ones pushing for an open marriage, that we were unsatisfied and looking for excitement elsewhere." The most chilling discovery came when Lisa found a notebook in Mark's office. It contained detailed psychological profiles of both of us, noting our vulnerabilities and pressure points. There were strategies for making us feel guilty, inadequate, and dependent. "Listen to this," she said, reading from the notebook. "Derek responds well to guilt about not being exciting enough. Increase criticism of routine, suggest he's boring. Lisa can be controlled through financial insecurity and isolation from support network. They've been following a manual for psychological manipulation, and it was working until we figured it out. But the notebook also revealed something else. We weren't their first targets. There were pages of notes about other couples, people we knew who had gotten divorced over the past 2 years under mysterious circumstances. Remember Jim and Carol? Lisa asked. How their divorce came out of nowhere. And everyone was shocked because they seemed so happy? I remembered. The divorce had been brutal, with Jim losing most of his assets because Carol's lawyer painted him as an irresponsible spender who had been emotionally abusive. According to these notes, they ran the same playbook on them, and on Dave and Michelle, and on Tom and Rebecca. How many marriages have they destroyed? At least 4 that I can identify, maybe more. As we pieced together the scope of their operation, I realized we were dealing with something much more serious than simple adultery. This was systematic fraud, potentially involving identity theft, financial manipulation, and organized deception. We need to go to the police, I said. With what evidence? Everything we found was obtained by going through their personal belongings without permission. Then we need to get evidence they can't dismiss. That's when I remembered something Sarah had said weeks earlier about the importance of documentation. If they were recording our conversations and photographing our dinners for evidence, that meant they were creating records that could be used against them, too. What if we turned their own strategy against them? I suggested. How? What if we got them to confess? If we could record them admitting to the manipulation, the fake timeline, the other couples they've targeted? That's risky. If they realize what we're doing, it's risky not to do something. How long before they decide we've gathered enough evidence and move to phase 2? Lisa was quiet for a long moment. What did you have in mind? As I outlined my plan, I saw determination replace fear in her eyes. We'd been victims long enough. It was time to fight back. I chose Sunday evening for the confrontation. Sarah was relaxed, confident, probably thinking about her Tuesday plans with Mark. She was curled up on our couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone with that satisfied smile I'd grown to hate. I had a small recording device in my shirt pocket, something I'd bought after researching the legality of recording conversations in our state. Since it was my own home, I was legally allowed to record without her consent. We need to talk, I said, sitting down across from her. About what? She asked, not looking up from her phone. About your relationship with Mark. Her thumb stopped scrolling, but she didn't look up. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. I pulled out printed copies of the emails I'd found. These are pretty explicit about your timeline and your phases. Now she looked up, and I saw the exact moment she realized her world was about to collapse. You've been going through my personal things? She asked, trying to sound indignant instead of panicked. I've been trying to understand why my wife has been lying to me for months. I spread the emails across the coffee table. March 15th, Sarah. That's when it started, isn't it? Your affair with Mark. She set down her wine glass with shaking hands. Derek, I can explain. I'm sure you can. You're very good at explaining things. I pulled out the photos I'd taken of her car at the hotel. Like how you explained that you were shopping when you were actually in a hotel room with Mark. The color drained from her face as she recognized the parking lot. Where did you get these? From someone who finally decided to stop being a victim. I pulled out more evidence. The restaurant receipts, the credit card statements, the timeline Lisa and I had constructed. 18 months, Sarah. You've been planning this for 18 months. Planning what? Derek, you're being paranoid. Am I? I showed her the psychological profiles from Mark's notebook. These are notes about my personality, my weaknesses, my pressure points. Federal marriage counselors don't usually keep files like this. She stood up abruptly, her wine glass falling to the floor and shattering. You don't understand. It's not what it looks like. Then explain it to me. Explain why you and Mark have detailed notes about other couples you've targeted. Explain the exit strategy and the asset protection plans. I pulled out document after document, watching her composure crumble with each new piece of evidence. How many marriages have you destroyed, Sarah? Jim and Carol, Dave and Michelle, Tom and Rebecca? It wasn't like that, she said weakly. Those couples were already having problems. We just helped them realize it. By manipulating them into compromising situations and then using that as leverage in divorce proceedings? Her silence was answer enough. The couple swap was never about exploring our marriage, I continued. It was about creating evidence that I was unfaithful too. You needed me to look like the bad husband so you could justify taking half of everything I've worked for. She started crying then, but even her tears felt calculated. Derek, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. The way you worked things out with the other couples? Before she could answer, there was a knock at our front door. She went pale and looked toward the sound like she was seeing a ghost. Expecting someone? I asked. She didn't answer. But I already knew. Lisa and I had coordinated this moment carefully. When I opened the door, Mark stood there with a confident smile that faltered when he saw my expression. Evening, Derek. Sarah called and said you two were having some communication issues. Thought I might help mediate. How thoughtful. Please come in. I was just showing my wife some interesting documents. He walked into our living room and immediately saw the papers scattered across the coffee table. His confident demeanor disappeared entirely. What's all this? He asked, though his voice revealed he already knew. Evidence of fraud, manipulation, and conspiracy to defraud multiple couples over the past 2 years, I said conversationally. Would you like to see your greatest hits? I particularly enjoyed the psychological profiles you kept on me and Lisa. Sarah and Mark exchanged a look that confirmed everything I'd suspected about their coordination. Derek, Mark said, switching to a condescending tone, I think you're misunderstanding some things. Why don't we all sit down and talk this through like adults? Adults? You mean like how adults don't manipulate their friends into fake couple swaps to gather evidence for divorce proceedings? Evidence? Sarah laughed, and suddenly her tears were gone. Derek, you've been happier these past few weeks than you've been in years. We gave you excitement, someone who actually wanted to spend time with you, by lying and manipulating everyone involved. By giving you something better than your boring, predictable life, Mark added. You should be thanking us. The casual cruelty in their voices was breathtaking. They genuinely believed they were doing us a favor by destroying our lives. And when you moved to phase 2, when you started the divorce proceedings and painted us as the unfaithful spouses, were we supposed to thank you for that too? You would have been fine, Mark said dismissively. A smaller house, a more modest lifestyle, you both would have survived, while you walked away with everything we'd worked for our entire lives. We earned it, Sarah said. We took the initiative, made the hard choices. You and Lisa were just settling, going through the motions, looking at them sitting in my living room, speaking about our destroyed marriages like business transactions. I realized that I'd never really known my wife at all. But they'd made one critical error in their calculations. They'd underestimated what 2 settling people might do when they discovered they had nothing left to lose. Well, I said, pulling out my phone. This has been illuminating. Now let me show you something interesting. I pressed stop on my recording app and then immediately called Lisa, who had been waiting for my signal. You can come up now, I said when she answered. Come up where? Sarah asked, confused. Lisa's been in her car outside for the past 20 minutes, recording this conversation through the living room window. Turns out when you install listening devices to spy on people, other people can use the same technology against you. Lisa appeared at our front door with her own recording device and a grim smile. Hello, Mark, she said. Interesting conversation. I especially liked the part where you both admitted to targeting multiple couples and earning money from their destroyed marriages. The looks of shock and panic on their faces almost made everything worth it. Unlike your illegal surveillance, I continued, our recordings were made with full knowledge that you were being recorded, which makes them completely admissible in court. Over the next few hours, as Mark and Sarah realized the full extent of what we'd uncovered, their united front crumbled completely. Mark tried to pin everything on Sarah, claiming he'd been manipulated. Sarah insisted it had been Mark's idea from the beginning. The truth, as it emerged, was even worse than we'd suspected. They'd been running this scheme for 3 years, targeting financially stable couples in our social circle. The money they'd gained from manipulated divorce settlements had funded their lifestyle and their ability to target new victims. The legal process that followed was swift and decisive. With recordings of their confessions and documentation of their previous victims, prosecutors had everything they needed for fraud and conspiracy charges. Mark was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all victims. Sarah received 18 months and lost her professional licenses. My divorce was finalized 6 months later. Because of the evidence of her systematic deception and fraud, I retained our house and most of our assets. Sarah was forced to liquidate her retirement accounts to pay legal fees and restitution. But the most important healing happened outside the courtroom. Lisa and I supported each other through the legal process, but we were careful not to rush into anything romantic. We'd both learned painful lessons about relationships built on deception. It was nearly 8 months before our first real date, dinner at a quiet restaurant where we could talk honestly about our fears, our hopes, and what we'd learned about ourselves. "I keep waiting for you to reveal some hidden agenda," she admitted over dessert. "I understand that feeling," I replied. "But you know what's different? When I'm with you, I don't feel like I'm being studied or managed. I feel like you actually see me. I do see you. And I like what I see." A year later, we were engaged. Our relationship was built on radical honesty and mutual respect. We shared everything: finances, passwords, concerns, dreams. Her ex-husband was released after serving 18 months. He moved to another state and, according to court records, attempted to run a similar scheme on new victims. He was arrested again within a year. My ex-wife moved back with her parents after being unable to find work in her field. Last I heard, she was working retail and still claiming to anyone who would listen that she was the real victim. The other couples who had been targeted found various paths forward. Most were able to recover financially through the civil litigation, though the emotional damage took longer to heal. As for us, we learned that love built on truth is infinitely stronger than love built on fantasy. We discovered that genuine partnership means protecting each other's vulnerabilities instead of exploiting them. On our wedding day, Lisa gave me a card that read, "Thank you for teaching me that trust isn't about blind faith. It's about choosing someone whose actions consistently match their words." I kept that card on my desk as a reminder that sometimes the worst betrayal can lead to the most genuine love. Justice was served, but more importantly, we learned who we really were when all the lies were stripped away, and we liked what we found.